Alright, let's talk about the Caribbean, specifically the Dutch Caribbean. You're probably picturing beautiful beaches, crystal clear water, and maybe a pina colada with a tiny festive umbrella. And you're not wrong. Behind that postcard-perfect scenery, politics money, a casino boss, more dramatic than a reality TV season finale yelling on a yacht. This is the story of gambling and government getting too cozy. A cast of characters you couldn't make up. Even in paradise, politics can get messy. Our first character is Francesco Corallo. Think of him as the casino king of the Caribbean, but with an Italian flair and a backstory that reads like a Bond villain's origin story. His father was a notorious figure linked to the Sicilian mafia, which, and I can't stress this enough, is generally not a great entry on your dad's LinkedIn profile. Corallo himself built a massive international gambling empire in Curaçao and Sint Maarten. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a financial force, a man whose wealth gave him a level of influence that most people can only dream of or have nightmares about. Next up, meet Garrett Schott. Imagine a political rocket ship. Schott burst onto the Curaçao political scene and became its very first prime minister in 2010. He was young, charismatic, and promised a new future for the island. The only problem is that his political career ended up looking less like a proud legacy and more like a cautionary tale. His time in power was short, chaotic, and ultimately ended with him facing a courtroom. And finally, we have Theo Heiliger of Sint Maarten. If Schott was a political rocket, Heiliger was more like a political institution. He was a dominant, almost dynastic figure in Sint Maarten politics for years. If something was being built, funded, or decided on the island, you could bet that Heiliger's name was somewhere in the conversation. He was a master of retail politics, incredibly popular with voters, and seen by many as the man who got things done. But like our other characters, his name also became entangled in whispers and, eventually, formal accusations of corruption. That suggested his power came with some very serious strings attached. Now, in stories like this, with so many accusations flying around, it's crucial to separate what's been proven in a court of law from what's still just an allegation. Think of it as the difference between a jury saying, "Yes, you did this," and your uncle forwarding you a chain email that claims Bigfoot is running a secret pizza parlor. One has a bit more weight to it. So let's stick to the legally proven, court-certified facts first, because those are the solid ground we can all stand on before we wade into the murkier parts of this saga, which, believe me, get very murky indeed. Let's start with Garrett Schott. His case went all the way through the legal system and the verdict was crystal clear. He was found guilty. Guilty of what, you ask? Official bribery, money laundering, forgery of documents. The court determined that he had accepted money and gifts while he was in office, which is a textbook no-no for a public servant. This wasn't a case of, he said, she said. This was a conviction upheld on appeal that resulted in a prison sentence. So, when we say Schott was a corrupt prime minister, that's not an opinion. It's a legal fact, stamped and certified by the Dutch kingdom's judicial system. The courts laid out the specifics of Schott's crimes in painstaking detail. They found that he had used his political party, MFK, as a vehicle to launder money. He received payments that were disguised as something else, and he failed to declare them as required by law. The bribery conviction was tied to him promising favors in exchange for financial support, essentially putting the government up for sale to the highest bidder. This is important. The judges didn't just say he was corrupt in a general sense. They pointed to specific actions, specific transactions, and specific laws that he broke during his tenure as prime minister, painting a clear picture of a leader who abused his power for personal gain. What about Francesco Corallo and Theo Heiliger? This is where the line between proven and alleged gets very, very important. While Corallo was named repeatedly during Schott's trial as the source of the illicit funds, he himself has not been convicted in Curaçao or Sint Maarten for bribing Schott. Similarly, while Theo Heiliger has faced his own separate legal battles and was convicted in a major corruption case known as Laramar, his specific financial ties to Corallo remain in the realm of allegations and journalistic investigation, not courtroom verdicts. So, Schott is the convicted party here, while the others are, in this specific context, central figures linked by accusations. So, how exactly does a prime minister get convicted for taking bribes? Well, it often starts with needing money. Lots and lots of money. Running a political campaign is expensive everywhere, and Curaçao is no exception. Garrett Schott's political party needed cash to compete, and according to the courts, he found a willing benefactor in Francesco Corallo. This wasn't just a friendly campaign donation. The prosecution and the judges laid out a trail of money from Corallo's gambling businesses to Shota and his partner. This was the heart of the case. It wasn't a one-off payment. It was a sustained flow of funds. Money was sent to accounts controlled by Shot. Money was sent to accounts controlled by Cicely van der Dees. The payments were disguised, funneled through other companies, labeled as loans to look legitimate. Investigators peeled back the layers and traced the money to Corallo's circle. The court found these were payments expecting something in return. Shot was, effectively, on the payroll of a casino boss while leading a country. What did Corallo allegedly want? Influence, favorable legislation for his casinos, a friendly ear in the highest office, help with bureaucratic or legal troubles. The court ruled this was bribery. Shotty used public office to serve a private benefactor, political corruption, a powerful figure buying access, a politician selling it. Evidence, bank statements. Evidence, witness testimony. Evidence, documents tying it together. The defense said the funds were loans or business dealings. The court wasn't persuaded. The timing of payments mattered, the secretive handling mattered, and the broader context mattered. Together, they pointed to a corrupt bargain. The conviction confirms money from Corallo's gambling empire flowed to Curaçao's prime minister, illegally. Why is nailing Corallo kind of like nailing Jello to a wall? Given that the court in Curaçao basically said Corallo's money was used to bribe the prime minister. So why wasn't Corallo prosecuted right there alongside him? And honestly, that is an excellent question that gets us into a complicated legal mess that's as tangled as a pair of headphones left in your pocket for a week. Prosecuting a figure like Corallo is incredibly difficult for a small island nation. It's a classic case of a big international fish in a small pond. The local nets aren't equipped. First off, there's the issue of jurisdiction and residency. Francesco Corallo is an Italian citizen who, for a long time, didn't even live on the islands. He operated his empire from a distance, making it devilishly hard for local prosecutors in Curaçao or Sint Maarten to build a case against him. And to charge someone with bribery, you generally need to prove their intent. Doing that when the person is in another country, communicating through layers of lawyers and associates, is a prosecutor's nightmare. It's like trying to prove who started a food fight when the main suspect is in another school district. Second, Corallo was also facing legal troubles back in his home country of Italy. At the same time Caribbean authorities were investigating him, Italian prosecutors were building their own massive case against him, accusing him of being part of a criminal association that skimmed hundreds of millions of euros in tax revenue from slot machine operations. This created a situation of parallel investigations. When multiple countries are investigating the same person, things get complicated. Evidence has to be shared, jurisdictions have to be respected, and sometimes one case takes priority over another. Corallo was eventually extradited from Sint Maarten to Italy in 2017 to face those charges. Finally, there's the sheer complexity and resources involved. Taking on a billionaire with a team of high-powered lawyers is a daunting task, especially for a small island with limited funding and manpower. Corallo and his legal team could and did fight every single step of the process. They challenged jurisdictions, filed counter motions, and generally threw up a mountain of legal paperwork designed to slow everything down. For the authorities in Curaçao, focusing on convicting their own former prime minister, a target who was physically present and clearly under their jurisdiction, was the more achievable goal. Corallo, the international man of mystery, was a much harder target to hit. Now let's hop over to the neighboring island of Sint Maarten, the Dutch side of an island shared with France. Here, we find another towering political figure, Theo Heiliger. And, you guessed it, more allegations involving our friend Francesco Corallo. While Garrett Shotta's connection to Corallo was proven in court, persistent reporting, political accusations, and widespread public perception. For years, Corallo was often described in the media and by political opponents as Heiliger's benefactor or sponsor, the financial muscle behind his political machine. The narrative that took hold in Sint Maarten was that Heiliger's long-standing political dominance was at least partially fueled by Corallo's financial support. Just like in Curaçao, running a political party in Sint Maarten is an expensive affair. Allegations swirled that Corallo provided the funds that helped Heiliger's party, the United People's Party, maintain its powerful position on the island. This alleged support wouldn't have been out of simple kindness. The implication was always that in return, Corallo's significant business interests on the island would be protected and prioritized. It was seen as a symbiotic relationship. political power in exchange for financial security. It's important to state again, these specific claims of Corallo funding Gallagher have not been proven in a court of law. They have remained in the realm of allegations, fueled by investigative journalism and political rivalries. Unlike the Shoddy case, there hasn't been a trial that produced a verdict linking Gallagher to Corallo's money. However, the perception of their connection was so strong that it became an accepted part of the political landscape in Sint Maarten. When people talked about power on the island, the names Gallagher and Corallo were often mentioned in the same breath, illustrating the deep-seated belief that big money from the gambling industry was influencing politics. Eventually, Theo Gallagher did have his own day in court, but for a different corruption case. He was convicted in the so-called LOWLANDS case, which involved taking bribes related to a port construction project. While this conviction cemented his fall from grace and proved he was involved in corrupt activities, it was separate from the Corallo allegations. The LOWLANDS case involved different businessmen and different schemes. So, while Gallagher has been legally proven to be a corrupt politician, the specific link to Francesco Corallo remains a widely reported but unproven part of the larger story, a tantalizing loose thread in this complex web of Caribbean politics. So why should anyone outside of these tiny islands care about any of this? Because the saga of Corallo, Shotte, and Gallagher isn't just a local drama. Corallo, Shotte, Gallagher. It's a clear example of a larger problem, the corrupting influence of big, often illicit money on politics. These cases shine a spotlight on how powerful outside interests, especially the gambling industry, can capture a state. When a single businessman has more money than the government's annual budget, the balance of power gets skewed. Think about it. The gambling industry is cash-rich and often operates in a legal gray area. For politicians in small economies, these businesses can seem like a bottomless ATM. In return, gambling bosses get favorable laws, lax oversight, a blind eye. This creates a vicious cycle. Corrupt politicians stay in power using the money. The source operates with impunity. It hollows out democracy from the inside. This is especially dangerous in the Dutch Caribbean given its geopolitical position. These islands are autonomous within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, but vulnerable. Their small size makes them susceptible to being overwhelmed by organized crime and corruption. The Netherlands has stepped in with resources and a special Anti-Corruption Taskforce, the RST. The convictions of Schott and Gallagher came from those joint efforts. But it also creates tension. Local politicians sometimes cry colonialism when Dutch authorities investigate. These stories reveal how fragile democratic institutions are against overwhelming financial power. They show how easily leaders can be tempted and how hard it is to hold wealthy figures accountable across borders. The Corallo saga is a stark warning. Paradise can be lost. Not to a hurricane, but to the slow erosion of integrity, where the line between government and the criminal underworld blurs. And that is a tragedy for the citizens left to deal with the consequences. So, after all that, what's the takeaway? Well, first of all, the Caribbean is still a beautiful place to visit. Just maybe think twice before you accept a friendly loan from a casino owner to fund your run for mayor of your hometown. But more importantly, it's absolutely vital to keep the facts straight. This story is a messy plate of spaghetti, proven facts, ongoing court cases, spicy allegations. Confusing one for the other is easy to do, but it's a disservice to the truth. So let's do a quick recap of what's what, just to be sure. Here's what we know for a fact, because a court of law said so. Gerrit Schott, the first Prime Minister of Curaçao, was convicted bribery, money laundering, forgery. The court found that he accepted money that originated from Francesco Corallo's sphere, and in doing so, he abused his office. That is a legal certainty. We also know for a fact that Theo Gallagher, a political giant in Sint Maarten, was convicted of corruption in a separate case involving bribes for a construction project. He is, legally speaking, a corrupt politician. These are the solid pillars of our story. Here is what remains in the category of allegations, investigations, and strong journalistic reporting. The direct role of Francesco Corallo in the bribery of Gerrit Schott. While the court identified his money as the source, Corallo himself was not convicted of that crime in Curaçao. His alleged role as a sponsor for Theo Gallagher also remains an allegation, not a proven fact from a courtroom. These connections are supported by a lot of circumstantial evidence and reporting, but they haven't cleared the high bar of beyond a reasonable doubt in a relevant court. The idea that Corallo is the puppet master behind all political corruption on the islands is a compelling narrative. but it's not a proven one. So, as you read or hear about these complex stories of crime and politics, always ask yourself, was this proven in court? Or is this an accusation? It's a simple question, but it's the most important one. The difference between a verdict and an allegation is the difference between established fact and a claim that still needs to be proven. The Corallo saga is a fascinating and troubling story, but its true power lies in understanding precisely what we know for sure, and what parts are still waiting for their final chapter to be written in a court of law. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check if Bigfoot's Pizza Parlor delivers.